Listen, I need you to understand something before we start this tale, because what I'm about to tell you will sound absolutely insane. My name is Vorthak, and I used to be a military strategist for the Kaldrith Imperium. Before everything went to hell in a handbasket, made of human spite and tactical genius. You want to know the exact moment my entire species realized we'd made a catastrophic mistake. It wasn't during the first battle. It wasn't when our fleets started disappearing. No. It was 3 cycles before we even fired a shot, when an old prophet named Keshin stood in front of the Grand Council and said 6 words that nobody, and I mean nobody, took seriously. If you strike first, they'll never stop. Yeah. We laughed too. Big mistake. Huge. Let me back up. 6 months before the war, we were riding high. The Kaldrith Imperium had just absorbed 3 smaller civilizations. Our territory was expanding, and our military hadn't lost a conflict in 2 centuries. We were, in our own minds at least, unstoppable. The kind of arrogant you can only achieve when you've been winning for so long that you forget what losing even looks like. Then came the humans. These weird 2-eyed bipeds from a planet they called Earth. A death world, if you believe the planetary classifications. Gravity that would crush most species. Weather patterns that could kill you in minutes. Predators at every level of the food chain. The kind of place where evolution apparently decided that being terrifying was the minimum requirement for survival. But here's the thing. They seemed nice, diplomatic. They sent ambassadors. They smiled with all those disturbing teeth. They offered trade agreements. They even laughed at our jokes, though I'm pretty sure they didn't understand half of them. My supervisor, a 4-armed genius named Rylock, was convinced they were weak. Look at them, he'd say, his voice dripping with contempt. No natural armor, no venom sacs, no redundant organs. They're fragile. One good strike and they'd collapse. I should mention that Rylock was the smartest tactical mind in our military. Graduated top of his class, never lost a simulation, had more medals than I had appendages, and he was completely, utterly, catastrophically wrong about humans. The tensions started over a mining colony, some worthless rock called Epsilon 7, that happened to sit right on the border between human space and ours. We claimed it first. They said they'd surveyed it years ago. The usual territorial nonsense that happens when 2 expanding powers meet. The Council wanted to take it. Simple as that. Send in the fleet. Establish dominance. Dare the humans to respond. Classic Imperium strategy. It had worked 43 times before. That's when old Keshin showed up. Nobody knows exactly how old Keshin was. Some said 300 cycles. Some said 1,000. The guy looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts and held together with sheer stubbornness. He had these eyes though. When he looked at you, you got the distinct impression he could see every mistake you were about to make for the next decade. He shuffled into the council chamber without an invitation, which was already a death sentence in most circumstances. Security moved to remove him, but council leader Tharn held up a hand. Tharn was old school. He respected the prophets, even if nobody else did anymore. Speak quickly, Seer, Tharn said, his tail twitching with impatience. Kashan looked around the room, at all of us. The generals, the admirals, the politicians, the strategists. And then he laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh you make when you see someone about to step on a rake, and you know there's nothing you can do to stop it. You're planning to attack the humans, he said. Not a question. A statement. Rylock bristled. The humans are weak. Our simulations show a 97% probability of victory in any direct conflict. Your simulations, Keshin repeated slowly, are based on species that know when to quit. The humans don't have that particular software installed. More laughter from the council. Even I chuckled. Come on. Every species knows when to quit. It's basic survival instinct. You fight until the cost exceeds the benefit. Then you negotiate, surrender or retreat. Warfare 101. Keshin wasn't laughing. I have seen their history. I have studied their wars. Do you know what humans call a victory? Nobody answered. With you I appreciate. Whatever's still standing when they decide they're done. He paused, letting that sink in. If you strike first, they'll never stop. They will pursue you across the galaxy. They will adapt to every tactic. They will turn your own strategies against you. And they will not stop until either you're gone, or they are. There is no middle ground with humans. There is no acceptable loss. There is only victory or extinction. Tharn leaned forward. You're saying they'd sacrifice their entire species over a mining colony. I'm saying they'll sacrifice whatever it takes. That's what makes them dangerous. That's what makes them different. Keshin's voice dropped to barely a whisper. They're vindictive. They hold grudges. and they have this absolutely terrifying combination of creativity and spite that turns every conflict into an existential war. Rylock slammed his primary fist on the table. Superstitious nonsense. The humans have a fleet 1/10 our size. Their weapons are generations behind ours. Their ships are slower. We have every advantage. You have every advantage, Keshin agreed. Right up until you don't. And then you'll understand what I'm telling you. But by then, it'll be too late. The council voted unanimously to proceed with the attack on Epsilon 7. Keshin left without another word. I saw him on his way out, and I swear, he looked at me with something like pity, like he knew exactly what was coming, and felt sorry for those of us too stupid to listen. We hit Epsilon 7 3 weeks later. The operation was textbook perfect. We jumped in with overwhelming force, destroyed the human mining platforms, and established our own base within 6 hours. 0 casualties on our side. The humans evacuated without even firing a shot. Rylock was ecstatic. See, they're cowards. They won't even defend their own territory. This war is over before it started. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something kept nagging at me. The way the humans had evacuated. It was too smooth, too organized, like they'd been expecting us, like they'd planned for it. The human response came 48 hours later. Not a military strike. A message. Broadcast on every frequency we had. Impossible to block or ignore. It was from someone named Admiral Patterson, a gray-haired human with scars on her face and ice in her voice. To the Caldreth Imperium, she began, and I'll never forget the calm, almost pleasant tone. You have committed an act of war against humanity. You have destroyed our property, threatened our citizens, and violated our territorial sovereignty. We understand that this may have been a miscalculation on your part. Mistakes happen. We're willing to be reasonable. Reasonable. That word should have been our first clue. Here are our terms for peace, Patterson continued. You will evacuate Epsilon 7 within 24 hours. You will pay reparations equal to 3 times the value of the destroyed property. You will issue a formal apology and acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and you will cede the disputed border region to human administration. These terms are non-negotiable. You have 24 hours to comply. The council chamber erupted in laughter. Laughter. Tharn could barely breathe. They want us to pay them? To apologize? After we just demonstrated our complete military superiority? The arrogance. Rylock was already drawing up plans for a second strike. We'll hit their nearest colony. Show them what happens when they make demands of the Imperium. I should have said something. I should have remembered Keshin's warning. But I was young and stupid and convinced that our military might made us invincible. The 24-hour deadline came and went. We didn't even bother responding to their message. That's when things got interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely terrifying in ways we couldn't have possibly imagined. The humans didn't send their fleet, they didn't launch missiles, they didn't do anything we'd simulated or prepared for. Instead, they hit us where we weren't looking, where we didn't even know we were vulnerable. It started with the banking system. Someone, and we still don't know who, managed to hack into the Imperium's financial networks. Not to steal money. Oh no, that would have been too simple. They redistributed it. Every account that had more than a certain amount suddenly found its credits transferred to accounts with less. Complete economic chaos in under an hour. While we were scrambling to fix that, they hit our communications network. Every official channel started broadcasting human music. Loud, obnoxious, impossible to override. Some song about never giving someone up and never letting them down. It played for 6 hours straight on every military frequency. Psychological warfare, Rylock said, his scales turning purple with rage. Childish pranks. It won't save them when our fleet arrives. But here's where it gets really fun. Because while we were dealing with the economic crisis and the music attack, the humans did something that still makes my head hurt to think about. They sent us glitter bombs. I'm serious. They loaded cargo drones with compressed air canisters full of fine reflective particles and detonated them in low orbit over every major Caldreth world. The stuff got everywhere. In our ships, in our atmospheric processors, in our ventilation systems. You couldn't walk 10 steps without getting covered in sparkly, sticky, impossible-to-remove human glitter. The military impact was negligible. The psychological impact was devastating. We looked ridiculous. Our mighty warships glittering like some kind of festival decoration. Our generals holding briefings while literally sparkling under the lights. Tharn called an emergency council session. This is humiliating. Send the fleet. Crush them. And we did. Oh, we absolutely did. We sent our third fleet, 60 capital ships strong, to the nearest human colony world, a place called New Bremen. Population 8 million, minimal defenses, an easy target to make our point. The fleet jumped in, expecting minimal resistance. What they found instead was every human civilian ship in the system, thousands of them, arranged in a sphere around the planet. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining vessels, even personal yachts. None of them armed with anything more serious than point defense lasers. Admiral Corvin, commanding the Third Fleet, sent them a message: evacuate immediately or be destroyed. The response came from what appeared to be a civilian cargo pilot. Yeah, that's gonna be a no from us. See, you threatened our people, so we're gonna make this difficult for you. You can't stop a military fleet with cargo ships, Corvin said, probably fighting the urge to laugh. True, the pilot agreed cheerfully, but we can make you shoot through us to get to the planet, and we've made sure every sensor in human space is watching. So go ahead, fire on unarmed civilians, see how that works out for you. It was a bluff, had to be. No species would sacrifice thousands of civilians to protect a colony. The cost-benefit analysis made no sense. Corvin ordered his ships to fire warning shots, to scatter the civilian fleet. The humans didn't move. Not one ship. They just sat there. Human stubbornness on full display, daring us to follow through. Corvin held his fire. He couldn't do it. None of our commanders could. We had rules of engagement, protocols. We didn't massacre civilians, even if they were being strategically idiotic. While the Third Fleet sat there, locked in the universe's most frustrating staring contest, the humans hit 3 of our supply depots simultaneously. Just destroyed them. Thousands of tons of supplies, gone. And that's when I realized Kashin had been right. This wasn't a war, this was a grudge match, and we'd just made ourselves the target of a species that apparently invented spite as a survival mechanism. Rylock called me into his office. He looked tired. The glitter wasn't helping. Neither was the fact that someone had hacked his personal computer to play that same song every time he logged in. Vorthak, he said, I need you to run new simulations. Factor in unconventional tactics. Everything, no matter how absurd. I ran the simulations, all of them, every possible human response I could imagine. The results weren't encouraging. They're not trying to defeat us militarily, I reported. They're trying to make it too expensive to continue, too embarrassing, too costly in every way that matters. They're fighting asymmetrically because they know they can't win a conventional war. So we just have to stay the course, Rylock said. Eventually they'll run out of resources, out of tricks. Unless, I hesitated. Unless what? Unless they meant what they said, about never stopping. I pulled up Keshin's warning which I'd recorded. If you strike first, they'll never stop. What if he didn't mean they'd fight until they win? What if he meant they'd literally never stop? That they'd keep coming forever, finding new ways to hurt us, until one of us was gone? Rylock dismissed it with a wave. No species fights that way. It's not logical, it's not efficient, it's not even sane. And that was the problem, wasn't it? We were applying our logic to a species that operated on completely different principles. Humans didn't fight for territory. They fought for pride, for revenge, for the principle of the thing. The war was 3 weeks old, when things really started falling apart. The humans had figured out that our ship's navigation systems all used the same base code, so they introduced a virus. Nothing that would make ships crash or explode. That would have been too merciful. No. This virus made every ship's navigation computer randomly play human comedy shows over the internal speakers. Loud enough to hear but quiet enough that you couldn't quite block it out. Every 6 hours, like clockwork, you'd get a dose of human humor whether you wanted it or not. Imagine trying to plan military operations while some human comedian tells jokes about relationships and pets and politicians. Now imagine doing that for weeks, months, with no way to stop it. The morale impact was catastrophic. Meanwhile, the humans were hitting our infrastructure with surgical precision. They'd blow up a power station, but not before making sure the explosion created a pattern visible from orbit that looked like a human hand gesture. We later learned was very rude. They'd sabotage our water treatment plants, but only enough to make the water taste terrible, not enough to make it dangerous. Every attack came with a message. This could have been worse. Evacuate Epsilon 7. Tharn finally called for negotiations. We'd sue for peace, cut our losses, move on. The humans sent a delegation, led by Admiral Patterson herself. She sat across from our entire council, with that same pleasant smile and those cold, cold eyes. Gentlemen, she said, you wanted to talk. Tharn spread his hands. Clearly we underestimated your resolve. We're prepared to discuss terms. Oh, I bet you are, Patterson said. Let me guess. You want to negotiate a ceasefire. Maybe we split Epsilon 7. Maybe you pay some token reparations. Everyone saves face. Sound about right? That seems reasonable, Tharn said carefully. Patterson's smile got wider, colder. Here's the thing. We gave you reasonable 3 months ago. You had 24 hours to take the deal. You didn't. So now you get our new terms. She slid a datapad across the table. Tharn read it. His scales went pale. This is, you're demanding complete withdrawal from 6 systems. Full reparations for every operation. Public admission of guilt. This is unconditional surrender. Yep, Patterson said cheerfully. And it's only going to get worse the longer you wait. Every week you delay, we add another system to the list. Every month we double the reparations. You wanted a war. Congratulations. You started one with a species that turns stubbornness into an art form. We have vastly superior military forces, Rylock shouted. Patterson looked at him like a teacher watching a particularly slow student. Do you though? Because from where I'm sitting you can't defend your infrastructure, can't secure your supply lines, can't even use your own computers without hearing human sitcoms. Your economy is in chaos. Your citizens are getting tired of glitter. Your military is exhausted from fighting ghosts. How's that superiority working out? The room was silent. Keshin warned us, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. The prophet. He said if we struck first, you'd never stop. Patterson's expression softened slightly. Someone in your government actually tried to stop this? Smart person. You should have listened. She stood up. You have 72 hours to accept our terms. After that, we start getting creative. And trust me, you don't want to see what human creativity looks like when we're motivated. She left. We sat there in stunned silence. Rylock was the first to speak. We can still win this. We just need to what? I interrupted. To fight harder. They're not even fighting us the way we know how to fight. Every time we figure out one trick, they have 10 more. Every time we secure one system, they hit 3 others. This isn't a war, it's a nightmare. Tharn looked old, tired. Find Keshin, bring him here. Maybe he knows how to end this. But Keshin was gone. Left the planet the day after his warning. According to records, he'd seen this coming and decided he didn't want to watch. The 72 hours ticked down. We tried everything. Launched counterattacks. Tried to hack their systems. Attempted to match their asymmetric warfare. The humans anticipated every move. It was like fighting someone who could see the future. Every trap we set, they avoided. Every strategy we employed, they countered. And all the while, that deadline approached. With 6 hours left, Tharn made the call. We'd accept their terms. All of them. I was in the room when we broadcast our surrender. Watched Tharn read the prepared statement, admitting fault, agreeing to withdraw, promising reparations. The human's response was almost immediate. Patterson again, looking satisfied but not smug. Accepted, she said simply. Withdrawal begins in 48 hours. We'll be monitoring. And just so we're clear, if you ever, and I mean ever, think about pulling something like this again, we'll remember. We'll be ready. And next time, we won't be nearly so nice. Nice. She called this nice. The war officially ended 4 months after it started. We lost 6 systems, paid reparations that would take decades to cover, and became a galactic cautionary tale. But here's the kicker. The thing that keeps me up at night. After everything settled, after we'd withdrawn and paid and apologized, I did some research, wanted to understand how they'd done it, how they'd beaten us so thoroughly. I found records of human military history, wars they'd fought among themselves before reaching the stars, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. Everything they'd done to us, the psychological warfare, the asymmetric tactics, the stubborn refusal to quit, the creative spite, that was them being gentle. That was them holding back because they had a treaty to consider. Rules of engagement, political implications. I found records of something they called World War II, the things they'd done to each other, the lengths they'd gone to, the sheer terrifying commitment to victory at any cost. And I understood Keshin's warning in a whole new light. If you strike first, they'll never stop, because stopping isn't in their nature. Giving up isn't an option. Their species seems to have evolved. They're a species that bombed themselves with nuclear weapons, and somehow decided the lesson was let's make sure we never have to do that again. Instead of maybe we should calm down. They colonized a planet where everything tried to kill them and called it home. They looked at space, a vast empty void that wants them dead, and decided to explore it. They turned spite into a survival trait, and stubbornness into a philosophy. We're lucky, I think, that they decided to be merciful, that they showed restraint, because I've seen what they're capable of when they don't. Rylock resigned in disgrace. Tharn died a broken leader. The Imperium's expansion stopped cold. And me? I became a teacher. Specifically, I teach young military strategists about the human war. Know what my first lesson is? If a species from a death world offers you peace, take it, because if you don't, you'll discover exactly why they survived when nothing else on their planet did. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder where Keshin went. If he's still out there somewhere, watching other species make the same mistake we did. Trying to warn them. I hope they listen better than we did. So here's the thing about being the person who teaches how not to get destroyed by humans 101 at the Caldrith Military Academy. Everyone thinks they know better. Every single class, without fail, some bright-eyed cadet raises their hand and says something like, "But couldn't we have just done X? Or what if we'd tried Y?" And I have to smile. That same tired smile Keshin probably had when he tried to warn us, because the answer is always the same. We tried X, we tried Y, we tried every letter in every alphabet we knew. The humans had a response for all of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You want to know what happened after we surrendered, don't you? Because that's where the story gets really interesting. Or really depressing, depending on your perspective. The formal treaty was signed 6 weeks after our broadcast surrender. I was part of the delegation. Not because I was important, but because everyone more important than me had either resigned, been fired, or developed sudden mysterious illnesses that prevented them from facing the humans again. We met on a neutral station. The humans brought Admiral Patterson, naturally, along with a half-dozen other officers and a civilian negotiator named Marcus Webb, who had this absolutely infuriating habit of making jokes during serious discussions. "So," Webb said as we sat down, "I bet you guys are fun at parties." Nobody laughed. Rylock, who'd been dragged out of early retirement for this, just stared at him with all 4 eyes. "Tough crowd," Webb muttered. "Okay, let's talk terms." The next 6 hours were humiliating. Every concession we'd hoped to negotiate was denied. Every plea for reduced reparations was met with detailed lists of exactly what the humans had spent fighting us. Every request for face-saving language was politely but firmly refused. Patterson leaned back in her chair at one point, watching Rylock squirm. "You know what the funny thing is? We didn't want this. Any of this. We were perfectly happy to share Epsilon 7. We'd have negotiated reasonable terms, but you decided to shoot first and think never. You humiliated us," Rylock said quietly. "The glitter, the music, the pranks. That wasn't warfare, that was mockery." "Yeah," Patterson agreed. "It was. You want to know why?" Rylock didn't answer. "You won for my sec. Because we were trying to give you an out. We were trying to make this embarrassing enough that you'd quit before we had to do real damage. Before we had to kill your people. Before this turned into the kind of war where both sides lose something that can't be replaced." She paused. "We were being kind." The word hung in the air like a weapon. Webb shuffled some papers. "Look, here's the reality. You attacked us because you thought we were weak. We responded proportionally. Could we have glassed your colonies? Absolutely. Could we have targeted your civilian infrastructure in ways that would have caused actual casualties, without breaking a sweat? But we didn't. We made you look silly instead of making you bleed, and you're complaining about it. It was disrespectful," I heard myself say. Everyone looked at me. "You treated us like children, like we weren't a threat." Patterson's expression softened slightly. "You weren't. Not really. Not to our survival. You were a threat to one mining colony, and our pride. So we responded in kind. Hurt your pride back. Made it clear that messing with us was more trouble than it was worth without actually killing anyone." She leaned forward. "Would you have preferred we took you seriously? Because I can show you what human warfare looks like when we take things seriously. It's not pretty." She pulled up a hologram. Images from human history. Cities in ruins. Landscapes poisoned. Casualty numbers that made my scales itch. This is what we do to each other when we're serious, when we're actually fighting for survival, when we decide something is worth dying for. The images shifted to more recent conflicts. Human colony wars. Pirate suppressions. This is what we do to external threats when negotiations fail. The difference was night and day. The pirates who'd raided human shipping lanes had been hunted to extinction. Every single base destroyed. Every ship captured or destroyed. No mercy. No quarter. Total annihilation. "So yeah," Patterson said, closing the hologram. "We hit you with glitter and bad music. We made you look foolish, because the alternative was making you extinct. You're welcome." The treaty was signed that day. We didn't even try to negotiate anymore. But here's where things got weird. Where the humans did something that still confuses our psychologists and political scientists to this day. 3 months after the treaty, after we'd begun withdrawing from the disputed systems, After the first reparation payments had been transferred, the humans sent us a gift. I'm not kidding. A gift. To the species they'd just defeated. It arrived at our capital world with no warning. A massive cargo vessel, human-flagged, broadcasting peaceful intentions. Security nearly shot it down anyway, out of sheer paranoia, but someone with more sense prevailed. The ship's captain was a cheerful woman named Lou, who seemed genuinely excited to be there. "We brought you something," she announced as her crew began unloading massive crates. "What is it?" the port authority asked suspiciously. "Glitter removal equipment," Liu said brightly. "Specialized cleaning systems, atmospheric scrubbers, the works. We figured since we made the mess, we should help clean it up." The equipment worked perfectly. Within 6 weeks, the glitter problem that had plagued us for months was completely resolved. The humans didn't charge us for it, didn't ask for anything in return, just dropped off the equipment and left. Tharn called me into his office. He looked confused, which was fair because I felt the same way. "What are they playing at?" he asked. "Why help us?" I'd been thinking about that. I think this is what they do. After wars, they rebuild, they help. I found historical records. After their biggest conflicts, they helped their enemies recover, poured resources into rebuilding, turned enemies into allies. "That makes no sense strategically," Tharn said. "It makes perfect sense if you're thinking long-term," I replied. "They don't want to fight us again, so they're making sure we don't have a reason to want to fight them, making sure we remember that they can be generous as well as terrifying." A month later, human medical teams arrived, offering to share advanced trauma treatment techniques with our hospitals. They'd noticed, apparently, that some of our soldiers were suffering from what they called post-traumatic stress from the conflict. They had experience treating it. Then came the trade delegations, the cultural exchanges, the student programs. The humans were aggressively, relentlessly friendly, like they were determined to make us forget we'd ever been enemies. It was working too. Public opinion was shifting. The younger generation especially started seeing humans not as conquerors, but as the species that sent doctors and teachers and equipment we needed. I met with Admiral Patterson one more time, about a year after the war ended. She was visiting our capital for some diplomatic function, and I'd been assigned as a military liaison. We had dinner, actual dinner, not a formal state meal. Just the two of us at a small restaurant that served both our cuisines. "Can I ask you something?" I said after we'd ordered. "Shoot," she said, then laughed. Poor choice of words. "Go ahead." "Why are you doing this?" "The aid, the friendship. After what we did, you could have just taken your victory and left us to rot. Why help?" Patterson took a sip of her drink, considering her answer. "Because we're human. We hold grudges, sure. We're stubborn and vindictive, and will fight tooth and nail when pushed. But we're also pack animals, social creatures. We prefer friends to enemies. Even enemies who attacked you. Especially enemies who attacked us. Because we understand something that a lot of species don't seem to get." She leaned forward. "Today's enemy can be tomorrow's ally. Your grandfather might have fought my grandfather, but that doesn't mean we have to hate each other. Humans figured that out the hard way, after a couple of wars that nearly destroyed us. We learned that winning isn't enough. You have to win the peace too." I must have looked skeptical because she laughed. "Look, I know it sounds crazy. Trust me, half our own government thinks we're nuts for helping you. But here's the thing. Right now you owe us. Not just money. You owe us politically, socially, culturally. We could have made you hate us forever. Instead, we're making you grateful, making you invested in our success. Because if we succeed, you benefit. And that means next time some other species thinks about attacking humans, you're going to remember this conversation. Remember how we treated you, and you might just warn them off." "You're turning us into your advocates," I said slowly. "We're turning you into our friends," she corrected. "There's a difference. Advocates can be bought. Friends are earned, and friends don't let friends make stupid decisions, like attacking a species from a death world." She was right. Of course she was right. Because 2 years later, when the Threxian Combine started making noise about human expansion, guess who talked them down? Us. The Caldreth Imperium, former enemies of humanity, explaining in great detail why fighting humans was a spectacularly bad idea. We showed them our records, our simulations, our casualty reports. Well, okay, we didn't have many casualties because the humans had been gentle with us, but we showed them what could have happened, what the humans were capable of when they decided to be serious. The Threxians listened. They negotiated. They didn't attack. And the humans sent them a thank you gift. Some kind of flowering plant native to Earth, delivered with a note that said, "For choosing wisdom over war." I started noticing a pattern. Every species that considered fighting humans but didn't receive gifts, aid, trade agreements. The humans were building a network of grateful allies, species who remembered that humans rewarded peace and punished aggression. It was brilliant, terrifying in its own way, but brilliant. But not everyone was happy with the new status quo. Rylock certainly wasn't. I found him in a bar 3 years after the war ended. He was drunk, which was unusual. Caldreth have high tolerances. He must have been working at it for hours. They broke us, he said when I sat down. Not with weapons, with kindness. They broke our pride, then gave us charity, made us dependent on their generosity. We're not dependent, I argued. The economy has recovered. We're stronger now than before the war. Cause of their aid, their technology, their trade agreements. He slammed a fist on the bar. We used to be conquerors. Now we're pets. Grateful, well-fed pets. We used to be arrogant, I corrected. We thought we were unstoppable. The humans taught us humility. That's not the same as being broken. You sound like one of them, Rylock sneered. Maybe I did. Maybe I'd spent too much time studying humans, understanding them. Or maybe I just learned the lesson Keshen tried to teach us all those years ago. Rylock died a year later. Officially it was listed as natural causes. Unofficially, everyone knew he'd given up. Just lost the will to keep living in a galaxy where the Imperium wasn't supreme. I felt bad for him. I really did, but I also understood that he represented the old way of thinking, the idea that military might made right, that conquest was glory. The humans had shown us a different path, one where strength was used as a deterrent, not a weapon, where former enemies could become friends, where the goal wasn't to dominate, but to coexist. It took me a long time to appreciate what they'd really done, not just to us, but for us. They'd given us an out, a way to save face while admitting we'd been wrong. A path forward that didn't require us to be humiliated or destroyed. I teach that now. In my classes, I tell the cadets about the war. Sure, about the tactics and the mistakes and the eventual surrender. But I also tell them about what came after. About the aid and the friendship, and the alliance that grew from ashes. The humans could have destroyed us. I tell every new class. They had the capability, the motivation, the legal justification. But they chose not to. And that choice, that mercy, was more powerful than any weapon, because it turned enemies into allies, hate into gratitude, war into peace. Some of them get it, some don't. The ones who don't usually wash out quickly. The military doesn't have much use for warmongers anymore. Not after the human war showed us what real war looks like when you're not the strongest species in the room. I got a message last year, from Keshin of all people. Turned out he wasn't dead, just living on some remote colony at the edge of known space. He'd heard about my teaching position. The message was short. You understand now. Good. Make sure they remember. Make sure they never forget what happens when pride overrules wisdom. But also make sure they remember what happened after. How the humans chose mercy. That's the real lesson. Not that they can destroy you. That they can destroy you and choose not to. I keep that message on my desk. Read it before every lecture. Because Keshen was right. About everything. The humans never stopped. They pursued us relentlessly. Found every weakness, exploited every vulnerability, but they also stopped exactly when they needed to. When we surrendered, when we admitted defeat, they could have kept going, could have ground us into dust. Instead, they helped us stand back up. That's the thing about humans that took me years to understand. They're not just vindictive, they're not just stubborn, they're not just creative and spiteful and terrifyingly persistent. They're also capable of extraordinary kindness, of generosity that makes no strategic sense, of forgiveness that seems to violate every principle of rational behavior. They're contradictions, walking, talking bundles of opposing traits that somehow work together to create something unique in the galaxy. I met a human philosopher once at a conference, got drunk together, which is apparently a human bonding ritual. I asked him to explain his species to me, to help me understand how they could be so gentle and so vicious at the same time. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "We're products of our environment. Earth didn't raise us to be one thing. It forced us to be everything. Gentle enough to care for each other. Vicious enough to survive predators. Smart enough to build civilizations. Stubborn enough to never give up. We're not contradictions. We're adaptations. We became whatever we needed to be to survive." "And what did you need to be to survive us?" I asked. He grinned. "Terrifying enough to win quickly. Kind enough to win permanently. You don't stay defeated if we treat you well. You stay allied. And allies are more valuable than conquered enemies." That's when I finally understood the full scope of human strategy. The war had never been just about Epsilon 7. It had been about establishing a pattern, showing the galaxy what happens when you attack humans, making an example that was harsh enough to deter others but gentle enough to allow for reconciliation. We were never really their enemy. We were their teaching moment, their demonstration, their proof of concept. And it worked. Over the next decade, human space expanded peacefully. Species negotiated rather than fought. Conflicts were resolved through diplomacy backed by the implicit threat of what could happen if diplomacy failed. The humans became the galaxy's peacekeepers. Not through conquest, but through reputation. Everyone knew they could fight. Everyone knew they would fight if pushed. But everyone also knew they preferred not to. It was a more stable peace than any empire had ever enforced, because it was based on respect rather than fear. On demonstrated capability rather than theoretical might. I'm old now. Getting close to retirement. I've trained 3 generations of Caldrith officers. Taught them about tactics and strategy and the human war. But mostly I've taught them about wisdom. About knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. About understanding your opponent. About the value of mercy and the cost of pride. Last week, a cadet asked me if I thought we could have won. If there was any scenario where the Caldrith Imperium could have defeated humanity. I thought about Cation, about Patterson, about all the lessons learned in blood and glitter and stubborn human persistence. No, I told her, we couldn't have won, not because we lacked the strength, but because winning would have required us to be willing to sacrifice everything. Our economy, our culture, our very existence as a species. The humans were willing to do that. We weren't. And in any conflict where one side is willing to go further than the other, the outcome is inevitable. So we should have negotiated, she said. We should have listened, I corrected. When Keshin warned us, when the humans gave us terms, when every sign pointed to this being a fight we didn't want. Pride deafened us, cost us systems and credits and lives. The real tragedy isn't that we lost, it's that we fought at all. She nodded, making notes. I could see her processing it, understanding that warfare isn't about weapons or tactics or even courage, it's about choices, about wisdom, about knowing when to fight and when to fold. That's the lesson Keishan tried to teach us. The lesson the humans reinforced with glitter and music and overwhelming creative spite. The lesson I'll spend the rest of my life teaching anyone who will listen. If you strike first against a species that doesn't know how to quit, that turns stubbornness into strategy and spite into survival. You'll discover something terrifying. They won't just defeat you, they'll do it in ways you never imagined. They'll make you regret ever raising your hand against them. But if you're lucky, if you're smart enough to surrender before it's too late, you'll also discover something wonderful. They'll help you back up. They'll turn enmity into alliance. They'll prove that the same traits that make them terrifying in war, make them invaluable in peace. The humans taught us that, taught the whole galaxy, really. And the lesson stuck. These days, when species have disputes with humanity, they negotiate, they compromise, they find solutions that don't involve weapons or threats or ultimatums. Because everyone remembers what happened to the Caldrith Imperium, how we picked a fight with a species from a death world, and discovered that surviving a death world requires being adaptable, creative, persistent, and absolutely impossible to intimidate. We remember the war, the humiliation, the defeat, but we also remember what came after. The aid, the friendship, the alliance. And we're grateful, not just for the help, but for the lesson. For being taught humility without being destroyed. For being shown a better way forward. Keshin knew. Somehow that old prophet understood what would happen. Saw the entire arc of conflict and reconciliation before it even began. I wish I'd listened to him. Wish we all had. But in a way I'm glad we didn't. Because the lesson we learned was more valuable than any we could have been taught with words alone. We had to live through it, experience it, feel the cost of pride and the value of wisdom. Now I pass that lesson on. Every day, to every cadet who walks through my classroom door. And sometimes, late at night, I imagine Cation out there on his remote colony, watching the galaxy change, watching species choose negotiation over conflict, wisdom over pride. I hope he knows his warning wasn't wasted, that even though we didn't listen in time to prevent the war, we listened afterward, and we made sure everyone else would listen too. That's the real victory, I think. Not the humans beating us in combat, but the humans teaching us how to live in peace, how to be better, how to choose wisdom over war. If you strike first, they'll never stop. But if you choose peace, they'll never forget. That's the lesson. That's the truth. That's what I'll spend the rest of my days teaching anyone who will listen. The humans aren't monsters. They're not saints either. They're survivors who learn to be kind without being weak, strong without being cruel, victorious without being vindictive. And that, more than any weapon or tactic or strategy, is what makes them truly dangerous. Because you can defend against weapons, you can counter tactics, you can match strategies, but you can't defend against someone who defeats you, and then helps you stand back up. Who wins the war, and then wins your respect? Who turns enemies into allies through sheer stubborn kindness? That's the human way. Terrifying in war, generous in peace, impossible to predict, impossible to defeat, impossible not to admire. Kei-Shin tried to warn us. The humans showed us why, and now I make sure no one ever forgets. Because the galaxy is better for it, safer, more stable, more peaceful. All because one species from a death world decided that winning wasn't enough. You had to win the peace too, and they did. They absolutely did.
Remember this. Choose wisdom, choose peace, because the humans will give you only one chance to be smart. Just one. Don't waste it like we did. So here is my advice to anyone listening. If a human offer peace, take it. After they offer war, run. And if they offer friendship after defeating you, accept it gratefully. Trust me on this. Please, trust me on this.